Alright, what's up, everybody? Back with another edition of Everyday Hoops. Hope you guys are having a good one. Today, we are going to be doing an NBA tier list of each team's 2023 NBA season. It's kind of like a grading a little bit, but I want to do a tier list instead. I've been wanting to do this video for a little while, and I know it's a little bit of weird timing because we're in free agency and draft, and a lot of these teams look a lot different from last year. But this is the only time I was really gonna be able to get to do this video, so why not? Relive the past of like 4 months ago or whatever. But yeah, thank you guys for the views on the videos and the shorts recently. Really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the content around here, consider subscribing, like, turn notifications on, stuff like that. I'd really appreciate it. We live that a lot. Look at the analytics. A little bit less than 1% of you that actually watch the videos are subscribed. So if you like the content around here, hit the subscribe button. It really mean a whole lot to me. And yeah, I don't want to waste any more of your time. Let's get right into it. So I talk about the tier list a little bit. Not every team is going to be graded on the same scale or same curriculum. You know, like it's a lot going to be based on the team's expectations for last season, what we expected from them, and what they actually did, and how they improved with like player development, and just how they got better or how they got worse and stuff like that. So like a team that was at the bottom, maybe like a 12, 13 seed last year that made the playoffs, they would get a really good grade. Because that team wasn't expected, but they made it. But a team that maybe was in the conference finals last year that lost in the first round or something like that isn't going to get a good grade because, yeah, their expectation was to be there and they didn't have it. I think you understand what I mean by it. And so now for the tier list, we have the S tier, which is the best tier. We have A, B, C, and D. I didn't put F because I don't really feel like any team had like an F type of season. I think everyone at least had a D. So yeah, we're gonna get right into it. Well, the first team we're gonna be doing is the Atlanta Hawks. They finished 41 at 41. Made a big trade for DeJounte Murray in the offseason. They're expected to be a really good dynamic guard lineup, and they didn't really have a good year. They had a lot of drama going on. They started off the year pretty bad. They fired Nate McMillan. They brought in Quinn Snyder. They were just kind of average, really. Didn't they have? I feel like there was a streak where they went like 20 games in a row where they went win loss win loss win loss win loss. Like they could never find any consistency. They made it into the playoffs. They won the first play-in game, but then they battled with the Boston Celtics pretty well too. Like they went to the playoffs and they gave the Celtics everything they could, bringing that series to 6 when it probably should have been a sweep. That also may be a little bit towards the Celtics as well instead of the Hawks. And yeah, last year it was kind of disappointing. They still made the playoffs though. After it looked like they maybe weren't, but they still made the playoffs. Still won the first playing game against Miami. So I think the Hawks are gonna go into C tier. They weren't really horrible. They did. They were, kind of disappointed expectations, definitely. But they kind of made up for it a little bit at the end of the season. So I'm gonna give them a C tier. Now the Boston Celtics. The Celtics finished 57 and 25. They were the second seed in the East. They were number one, basically almost in the entire NBA for a very, very long time. Till like after the All Star break, they kind of fell a little bit, and the Bucks caught them because the Bucks were on fire. They had a really good year by Tatum and Jalen Brown both made All NBA. Joe Mazzulla had a really good coaching year. They had Malcolm Brogdon with Sixth Man of the Year. Looked very good. They went to the playoffs and kind of they were in the finals the year before. They looked like they're going to improve, and they kind of did. They went to the playoffs, but they didn't have as great as a playoff run as we thought they probably could have had or would have had. You know, like they the Hawks took them to 6 games. That shouldn't have been, there. They went 7 with Philly. They were down 3-2. And then they lost to the Heat in the conference finals in 7 games. The 8 seed Miami Heat. I think it's between A and B. I don't think they had a S tier type of year. I think like S tier year would have been they won a championship because they were in the finals last year. A tier because they still played pretty good and they still made it far. They just lost the conference finals, or maybe B tier because they kind of disappointed expectations into the playoffs a little bit. I'm gonna go between A and B. This is tough. This is kind of tough. I'm gonna go with a B tier for now. We might be able to change it later. I'm gonna go back and look at things, but right now I'm gonna put them in the B tier because they kind of disappointed expectations a little bit. And the next team is the Brooklyn Nets. They finished 45-37. They had a lot of stuff going on as well. Came in with Kyrie and KD, and ended the year with Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson. They traded away Kyrie and KD after they went on a crazy run. They were like a top 2, top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference at one point, and then Kyrie requested a trade, and then they trade Kevin Durant. They still look pretty solid. They still make the playoffs. They get swept in the first round, and their team is just entirely different. So I don't know how to base their expectations because coming into the year, we couldn't predict that Kyrie and KD were going to get traded at the trade deadline and that they were going to have Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, and all of them. They still play pretty solid. They did get swept in the playoffs. Yeah, this is a very interesting one because their team changed so drastically halfway through that it's like, do we put them at a low because they're expected to be good and then they have to trade away their stars, or do we put them kind of average because even though they did trade their stars, they still were very solid? I don't know. I'm gonna put them in either B or C. I feel like. I'm gonna put the Nets in. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know how to grade them. Like, do I put them in the tier of like? Yeah, this is very. I'm gonna put them in B tier. I'm gonna judge them because if they went after the trade deadline and fell, I would have put them in C. But because they went to the trade deadline, Mikal Bridges looks like a star now. They had some really good outbreaks from players like Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton and Dwayne Finney. Like, they had those kind of players step up, and they still made the playoffs and were still an exciting team. I'm going to keep them in B tier. Next, we have the Charlotte Hornets. They're going to D tier, 27-55. LaMelo, I don't even know how many games he played, but he probably played like 30-something games, which sucks. They didn't really get that much development from too many players, and they still look like a pretty bad team. Even though they started the year off pretty good, like the first month and a half of the season, they look like pretty solid, and then it just kept falling and falling and falling. Also, they didn't sell at the deadline, which I hate. They didn't trade like Oubre or Rozier or Gordon Hayward. They kind of just kept this team going, and yeah, they're D tier. They did not have a good year. Next, we have the Chicago Bulls. They finished 40-42. They made the play-in, lost. They were 3 minutes away from making the playoffs, and they lost. It's either C or D for me for the Bulls. Because they're kind of boring. They did not have a great season. They made the play-in because the second half of the year, they also because of the East. The East wasn't that after like 6 or 7 in the East. It kind of was like kind of boring. Lonzo's still out. That Levine had a good year. Vucevic kind of came back. DeRozan was solid still. Had guys like Caruso, Patrick Beverly came, and they became one of the best defenses in the second half of the season. I'm gonna put them in C tier. They still made the play-in. They still were, I guess, okay, but it was pretty boring. They might be a team that moved down to D tier after it's all done. But yeah, they did not have a good season. C tier. Next, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. They finished with 51 wins. They lost in the first round, kind of embarrassingly, honestly. They traded for Donovan Mitchell, and they looked really good last year. Oh, well, the year prior, they were one game away from making the playoffs for the first time without LeBron in a very long time, but they lost that game to Atlanta. They came in, they made a big trade for Donovan Mitchell, and they look like a for sure playoff team. Maybe a little bit less, not a contender, but maybe the next tier below it. Still a young, fun team. They had guys like Darius Garland play good. Evan Mobley in his second year played pretty solid. Donovan Mitchell was very, very good. Made All NBA second team. I think the Cavaliers get a. Ooh. I think the Cavs get an A tier type season. Might move up to S because they did go from not making the playoffs to 51 wins, and they looked like a really good team. Yeah, they still look like a really good team. But yeah, honestly, I think if they performed better in the playoffs, they would have been S tier. But because in the playoffs they did not look very good. Also got to take a little bit of account that like none of those guys, like Donovan Mitchell and like Jared Allen, were the only guys that were ever made the playoffs on that team. Still had a very young experience. But I think if they played a little bit better in the playoffs, they would have been S tier because their playoffs are kind of bad. Put them in A tier, but they still had a really good season. Next, we had the Dallas Mavericks. They finished 38-44. They made the conference finals 2 years ago, losing to the Warriors. And they came into this season. They made a big trade at the deadline for Kyrie Irving. They were very much struggling. Luka had some phenomenal performances, but it was just. And then at the end, they got Kyrie and they got worse somehow. Um, yeah, they. And then at the end of the year, they just kind of folded. They tried to keep their play, which they eventually did. So, from the conference finals to not even making the play-in is pretty bad, especially when they didn't sell or didn't make a fire. So they kind of had like a similar team. Of course, adding Kyrie, obviously, but even without Kyrie, they were still kind of like, okay. They weren't never that good. Should I put them in C tier or D tier? Because conference finals to not even make the play-in is very, very bad. But I feel like D tier is. I'm putting them in D tier. D tier. They definitely had some expectations. Maybe not even making back to conference finals, but at least being competitive, and they just were not competitive at the end of the season. So, yeah, they get D tier. Next up, the Denver Nuggets, pretty easy S tier. Won 53 games, the first seed for the first time ever in their franchise history, made the finals for the first time ever, and won their first ever NBA championship. Kind of just moseying through the playoffs like nothing. Nikola Jokic had an amazing season. Jamal Murray came back and was great. Guys like Aaron Gordon, KCP, Michael Porter Jr., Bruce Brown had amazing years. This is probably the best season in Denver Nugget history this season, and they get S tier, no questions about it. Next, we have the Detroit Pistons. They finished with the worst record in the league, 17-65. I'm putting them in the D tier because they won 17 games, first of all, and also because Cade Cunningham couldn't play this season. And I feel like if Cade played, they would have been probably a C tier because they had guys like Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, who I think look good. Bogdanovich had a pretty good year. So player development wise, they were decent. But Cade Cunningham, their future star of the franchise, hopefully, didn't play. This barely played. Probably played like about 4 games, maybe 5 games before getting hurt, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, it was just kind of maybe a little bit of a waste of a season for Detroit because Cade didn't play and he didn't really get to develop. And they also won 17 games. So I think they're D tier for me. Next, I had the Warriors. They finished 44-38. They were NBA champions in 2022. Came in, had a very bad start to the season, but then started to kind of ramp it up. Steph missed a lot of time. Their bench was pretty bad. Had to trade away James Wiseman, one of their young guys. Couldn't win games on the road. They go to the playoffs as a 6 seed, and they go to 7 with Sacramento and they win, but then they lose to the Lakers in the second round. From NBA champions to losing the second round isn't horrible. They did have some pretty. They didn't look like the same Warriors team, which is why I might want to put them in C tier. But then again, they still made the second round of the playoffs, and they still had Steph, Clay, and Dre, which was solid. The playoffs they looked a lot better than the regular season, but comparing it to winning a championship and then looking bad for a lot of the regular season, still making the playoffs, not avoiding the play-in, making it to the second. I'm gonna put them in B tier just because they made it. If they would have lost to Sacramento, I feel like I would have put them in C tier because they beat Sacramento, which was the team that was very good. They went to the second round and lost to the Lakers. They still have some good moments from Steph in them. B for now. I might move them down to C later, but I think right now I'll keep them in B tier. Next, we have the Houston Rockets. They finished 22-60, tied for the worst record in the Western Conference. They saw. I have an argument for them being in C tier because they looked. The second half of the season was a lot better. Jalen Green started to hit a stride. Jabari Smith Jr. looked really good. Alperen Sengun had a very good season that potentially could be most improved next year. They still had some bad moments. They still lost 60 games, which they've done the last few years. Now they have a direction, but if we're talking about last season, they still didn't really have a direction. Steven Silas got fired before the last game, even when they were shaking hands with the coach at the end of the game. He got fired, basically. Do I put him in D or C? Because they did have a little bit of moments at the end of the season that made you look like, okay. I'm gonna put them in D tier. D tier. Still D tier. Next are the Indiana Pacers. Finished 35 and 47, 11th in the East. This is going to be a very interesting one as well because they had their player development. Tyrese Halliburton became an all-star. Benedict Mathurin had a really good rookie season. Brought guys like Andrew Nemhard, made all-rookie team. I think, right? I think he made all-rookie team. If he didn't, he was very close as the 31st overall pick. They had some solid moments from some young guys that you wouldn't expect. They were a playoff lock at the first few months of the season until Tyrese Halliburton got hurt, and then they dropped from 4 to like 13 or so, or 4 to like 11 or something in like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. They really dropped, and they couldn't really make that back up. So for that, they're not D tier. For that, I kind of want to put them in a B tier because player development wise, like they found their star player in Tyrese Halliburton. They had a lot of good moments from a lot of good young players. They look like they're going to be a playoff team. If Tyrese Halliburton doesn't get hurt, maybe they make the playoffs. So I think for that, I'm putting them in a B tier just because of that. I think their development wise and all that stuff, I think they get B tier. Next up, the LA Clippers. They finished 44 and 38. They were the fifth seed, I want to say, in the West this year. Yeah, they're the fifth seed in the West. They lose in the first round because Kawhi Leonard and Paul George were injured again. So for that, I'm putting them in the C tier. Because again, their expectations are high. They had a pretty good team. They didn't have a great start to the season. They made some moves at the trade deadline. They brought in Russell Westbrook, which is a big positive, and he looked very good. He was their best player in that playoff series when Kawhi wasn't playing. But yeah, still the expectations are high, and they're not hitting them again. They lose in the first round again. So for that, I gotta put them in a C tier. Next, we had the LA Lakers. They finished 43 and 39. They had a not great first half of the year. Then they went to the trade deadline, uh, flipped their entire roster around, brought in some nice young pieces, and they go all the way to the conference finals from the play-in. So I think for that, uh, I think they had an A tier type season, considering they came into the season with Russell Westbrook still. They were horrible last year, and they had some expectations of making the playoffs. They not only made the playoffs after flipping their whole team around, but they made it all the way to the conference finals as a play-in team, um, beating the Grizzlies, beating the Warriors, and losing to the eventual champions. I think they had an A tier type season. LeBron was great. AD had one of his best seasons in a very long time for the Lakers. They had guys like Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, and them step up. And yeah, I think they had an A tier type season. Next are the Memphis Grizzlies. They finished 51 and 31. They were the second seed last season. They finished the second seed again. They did have a lot of off-court issues with John Morant and Dylan Brooks on the court and off the court as well. They still won 50 games, even after a lot of people thought they would have dropped. Like me, I thought they would drop a little bit because a lot of teams in the West were getting better, but they stayed there. They lose in the first round to the Lakers. Yeah, they just had a lot of off issues going on, but they still were pretty solid. So I'm gonna put them in a B tier because they still had a really good regular season. It was just a lot of other issues that kind of made them lose in the first round and had injuries as well. Brandon Clark and Steven Adams both got hurt at the end of the season. So yeah, I'll B tier. Next, Miami Heat. They finished 44 and 38. They were the 8th seed in the East, and they made it all the way to the NBA Finals. So I think they had a pretty not. This is interesting because last season they made all the way to they were one shot away from making it to the NBA Finals. They lost in the conference finals in 7 to Boston. And coming into this year, the expectation was to be good. And they did not look good in the regular season at all. A lot of injuries. They're one of the worst offenses in the league. They made the play-in, lose the first play-in game, or 3 minutes away from losing the second play-in game and missing the playoffs completely. But then they make it all the way to the NBA Finals. Like, their regular season and playoffs were so much of opposites. Do I give them S tier because they made it to the finals, even though they had a bad regular season, even though the expectations were kind of... I think I still have to, right? Because they made it to the NBA Finals when, looking at the regular season, they shouldn't even been close. But then again, last year, they were one shot away from making it to the finals, and they looked pretty good. So looking at the regular season expectations for them, they still kind of hit expectations, but they didn't, or they shouldn't have. It's weird. I think I'm going to put them in S tier I'm gonna keep him in S tier because of that. I'm gonna keep him in S tier. But yeah, that's a very interesting one. Next, we have the Milwaukee Bucks. They finished 58-24, the best record in the NBA, and they lost in the first round. So, the regular season was great. You know, they went on a streak in like February to March where they were like lost 2 games maybe. They were on fire. Giannis wasn't running for MVP again. A lot of guys, even without Chris Middleton being there for a lot of the season, they still had Drew Holiday made the All Star team. Brook Lopez still played really, really good, and they're really good in the regular season. But then the playoffs, they lost. Now Giannis didn't play every game, but they still lost, even with Giannis on the court as well. So I think I have to put them in C, right? I mean, their expectations are high. Last year, they were 1 game away from making it to the conference finals. But a little bit of not a pass, but Chris Middleton didn't play in that series. If Chris Middleton plays, they may won and go to the conference finals. Maybe they make it to the NBA finals again. Their expectations were very high, especially after the regular season going into the playoffs. A lot of people, even I, would have thought they would have been in the finals at least, maybe conference finals. But then they lose in the first round in 5 to an 8 seed. I think I have to put them in C tier because of that, because of the playoffs. Like they lost in the first round as the best team in the league. I feel like that's C tier, you know? Next, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves. They finished 42-40, the 8 seed in the West. They lost in the first round to the Denver Nuggets. They made a huge trade, trading basically their future away for Rudy Gobert. It did not look good at the start of the year. Cat got hurt. Cat missed a lot of the season. But then once January hit, they started to turn it around. Kyle Anderson, Anthony Edwards make the All Star team. They looked. Jay McDaniels had a really good season. They brought it back, make the play in, lose the first playing game, win the second playing game, and make it to the playoffs. And they gave Denver a solid fight in 5 games. Last year, they also lost in the first round. Their expectations were higher, though. Their expectations were to grow from that to be maybe a 4 or 5 seed and look pretty good. But they didn't. The Rudy Gobert trade does not look great for them right now, 1 year in. So, but they still made the playoffs. They kind of still made like kind of the same thing as last year. So, do I put them in C tier though, because their expectations were a little bit higher, and they didn't really feel of them, or do I put them in B tier because they still kind of finished it with the same result as last season, which is not bad for them considering they're the Minnesota Timberwolves. Uh, they had a lot of things at the end of the year that I feel like look good, but I'm gonna put them in C tier because their expectations were a little bit higher. They didn't really start hitting them until like the last 2 months of the season, you know. So I think I'll put them in C for now. Next we had the Pelicans. They finished 42-40. They lost the first playing game. They finished as a 10 seed in the West. This one is a very interesting one and great as well because they started the year off amazing. Zion was playing very good, even though Brandon Ingram didn't really play that much in the first half of the season. They were number one at one point. They were the number one seed in the West at one point in December. A top 3, top 4 seed looking like a playoff lock. And then Zion gets hurt, BI gets hurt, CJ gets hurt. And literally in 2 weeks, they went from the 4 seed to like the 13th seed. And then they brought it back. Brandon Ingram played amazing in the second half of the season. They had a lot of good development. Guys like Najee Marshall, Jose Alvarado, Trey Murphy played very good for them. They ultimately ended up missing out on the playoffs. Last year they brought the Suns to 6 as the 8 seed. This year they missed the playoffs. They had a lot of good development though, but Zion and BI didn't play that much together again. You know, so where do we grade the Pelicans? Should I give them? I feel like I have to put them in C tier as well. Kind of a similar thing to the Timberwolves. They had higher expectations, but also injuries really affected that as well. Like if Zion and BI don't get hurt, they probably finish as a top 5 seed in the West, and who knows what happens there. But because I kind of want to put them in B though. Nah, no. I'm putting them in C. I'm putting them in C. Next, we had the Knicks. They finished 47-35. They lost in the second round to the Heat. I think they go. Ooh, I think they go in. Did I put them in S tier? Because they had a really good season. You know, They had a really good season. Jalen Brunson became very, very good. Guys like Josh Hart and that Emmanuel quickly took steps up. They beat the Cavs easily in the first round. They just lost two. They just lost their touch in the second round to the Heat. They're either going in S or A. I think I'm gonna put them in A tier. I think if they would have gave the Heat a little bit more of a fight, they definitely had a chance to get to the conference finals. If they made it there, I would have put them in S for sure. I think they get A tier, but they had a really really good season, kind of similar to the Cavs, where I'm ranking them. Like last year, like 2 years ago they made the playoffs. Last year they fell out of the playoffs. This year they acquired Jalen Brunson. He looks like an all-star level player, and then yeah, they kind of ascended up. So I think I'm gonna put him in A tier for now. Next, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. They finished 40-42, one game away from making the playoffs. They finished the ninth seed in the West, and I think they are an A tier as well. I think even though they didn't make the playoffs, their season was great. They were one of the best defensive teams. They had a lot of guys. Gilgeous-Alexander became an All NBA first team like player. Jalen Williams stunned everybody and finished second in Rookie of the Year voting. Guys like Josh Giddey, the other Jalen Williams, Aaron Wiggins. They had some great season, and they did all this without their number 2 overall pick, Chet Holmgren, not even playing this season as well. So and yeah, Mark Daigneault was very good. Finished top 3 in coach of the year. They're one game away from making the playoffs. The Thunder, looking at the expectations for this season, shouldn't even have been near that. They should have been just slowly improving, but they went from being a bottom in the West to one game away from the playoffs. I think with so many of their young players developing as they did, they look like they're in an amazing position for next season. So I think for me, I gotta put them in the A tier because of that. Next, we have the Magic. They finished 34-48. I think they go into B tier. I think they kind of had a similar thing to the Thunder, but in a little less for circumstances because they weren't that close to making the playoffs. But they had a lot of good moments, especially if you take away the first like month and a half of the regular season from like December on. They were like a 500 team, which is really good for them because they've been pretty bad the last few seasons. Paulo was unanimous, well, should have been unanimous Rookie of the Year. They have a future superstar in him. They had a lot of guys. Markel Fultz looked really good. Wendell Carter, Franz Wagner. Bol had an improved season. Cole Anthony became a really good 6-man. Mo Wagner had some good showing. Like the Magic look like they're going to be a really good team in a few years, especially with the draft picks they added and stuff, but we're not talking about that right now. They're talking about last 2023 season for them. But I think, yeah, looking at the expectations for them and what they look like, they kind of surpassed that a little bit. The record wasn't amazing, but watching them on the court, you could tell that there's some good things going on in Orlando. So I think for that, I'm going to put them in a B tier. Next, we have the Philadelphia 76ers. They finished 54-28. Lost in the second round again to the Boston Celtics when they were up 3-2. One win away, and they lose 2 games in a row. And yeah, they lose a game 6 at home. That was very tough. And they just get losing game 7. Joel did win MVP. James Harden had a good regular season. Tyrese Maxey was pretty good as well. The regular season was pretty good, but their whole thing was going to come down to the playoffs. And in the playoffs, they had a chance to make it to the conference finals finally, and they're going to have a good match against Miami Heat. They could have maybe even made the NBA finals. Who knows? But they lose again. They lose kind of embarrassingly in Game 7 as well. They got destroyed by Jason Tatum in Game 7. So I got to put them in a C tier, man. Like, the expectations are high for Philly. The MVP and Joel Embiid, James Harden, this is the best team they've had in a little while. And they were one win away. They had 2 chances to win one game to make it to the conference finals. And they lose both those games, one being at home. In an embarrassing fashion as well. Joel Embiid did not have an amazing playoffs. James Harden had some good games once in a while, but he again, another bad playoff run for him. And yeah, now Philly's kind of in just a state of we don't know what's going to happen with them with the offseason and stuff. With what's happening now with the James Harden situation and stuff. So I think for them, I got to put them in a C tier. Next, I have the Phoenix Suns. They finished 45-37. They were pretty bad to start the year. They had a lot of injuries. Devin Booker came back, and they jumped all the way back up. Then the trade deadline, they traded for Kevin Durant. And they made it to the second round, and they lose to the eventual champion Nuggets in 6 games. They again get embarrassed at home in an elimination game, losing by 30. Um, so yeah, this is a very interesting one because their expectations were high because Kevin Durant came, and when Kevin Durant came, I don't think they lost the game in the regular season with Kevin Durant on their team. Then they made it to the playoffs and they lose, but also their bench was not existent as well. But their expectations were a little high. Uh, I'll put them in. I kind of want to put them in B tier because looking at their team, they did have Booker, Durant, Paul, and Hayton. Chris Paul didn't play. He got injured again. DeAndre had another not good playoff run. Booker and Durant were on fire, but their bench didn't really do much. But their expectations are a little high, even before Kevin Durant came. And after Kevin Durant came, they're a lot higher. They lose in the second round again. I'm gonna put them into C tier because I feel like, yeah, after Kevin Durant came, a lot of people were expecting them to win the West, and yeah, they had a lot of things that stopped them from doing that. But their expectations were high even before Kevin Durant was there. The expectations were a little bit high as well, but Kevin Durant just kind of jumped up, and I think losing the way they did, I'll put them in the C tier. Next, we have the Portland Trailblazers. They finished 33-49. They go into D tier. Expectations coming into this season. Damian Lillard is back. Anthony Simons is a year better with a lot of money. Jeremy Grant came into this team, and they had a really good first month. And then from then on, it just started to fall and fall and fall and fall and fall. Um, yeah, and now we know what situation Portland's in now. But yeah, their expectations were making the playoffs and being good with Dame, and they didn't do that. So D tier. Next, we have the Kings. S tier, no question. 48-34. First playoff appearance in 16 years. And we didn't just make the playoffs, but were firmly in the top of the West for a lot of this season. They had an amazing, historical offensive year. Mike Brown was coach of the year. De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis both make All-Star team. Keegan Murray was really good as a rookie. Guys like Kevin Huerter, Malik Monk, Harrison Barnes really provided a lot for this team. And yeah, they didn't just look like the regular old Kings. They actually looked like a really good team. They lost in 7 to Golden State, but even then, no matter what happened in the playoffs, I feel like they were still good. S tier, no questions about it. Next, we have the Spurs. They finished 22-60, tied for the worst record in the West. Uh, dang. The thing I was gonna say is that the Spurs get a C because they ended up getting the number one pick, but by the time, well, actually, when the season ended, we knew they were going number one because they did the draft lottery in the conference finals. So their goal was to tank and get Vic, and they did that. Um, so do they get C tier because of that? And they didn't look like. Honestly, they could have won a lot more games, but there's a lot of times where you definitely tell Greg Popovich was like, "Hey, we don't really, we try to get as many losses as possible, man. Stop playing around." Like Keldon Johnson had a good year. Guys like Zach Collins kind of grow his draft stock. I mean his stock. Devin Vassell had a good year, even though he only played like 30 games, maybe. Jamie Sohan had a pretty solid regular season. Um, yeah, development wise, they were solid, and they actually didn't look like a horrible team. Their expectations weren't that high at all either, because DeJounte Murray did get traded, and they were trying to get Vic, and they ended up getting Vic. So I think I'll put him in C tier because of that. Honestly, I think I'm gonna put him in C tier. Next, we have the Toronto Raptors. They finished 41-41. Definitely disappointed after making the fifth seed as a solid young team 2 years ago. Last year, they kind of really disappointed. They're just hard to watch. Scotty Barnes didn't have the same fire he did in his rookie season. Fred VanVleet had a not great season. A lot of talk about OG Anunoby getting traded. Their bench was non-existent. Yeah, just not a great year in Toronto. Uh, so I'm gonna put them in C tier. I feel like if I put the Bulls in C tier, I have to put the Raptors in C tier, just because, like, just because I kind of feel like I have to for that because they're kind of on the same kind of plane a little bit. But yeah, Toronto did not have a great season. Next, we have the Wizards. They finished 35-47. I feel like I put them in D tier. They were just not that good. They had some good moments. Todd Kuzma, Porzingis came back to kind of all-star form. Bradley Beal was solid. Their young player development isn't that great. Wasn't that great. They were just kind of just bad, not fun to watch either. I'm putting them in D tier. And the final team we have was the Utah Jazz. They finished 37-45. They go into B tier. I think Larry Marketing, most improved player, came out of nowhere and became a really good All Star. A lot of people, if you would have asked before the season started who was going to be the worst team in the NBA, everyone would have said the Utah Jazz. And they were one of the best teams in the NBA for the first month. They kind of died down as the season went on, traded a lot of their guys, but they still look like a very competent basketball team. And even when they were trying to tank, they were still competitive. And they had a lot of guys that showed off. Walker Kessler had an amazing rookie season. Again, Larry Marketing made the All-Star team. Jordan Clarkson had some good moments as well. Yeah, I think they go into B tier. And yeah, okay. Looking back at this list now, I don't know if I want to make any changes. Honestly, I feel like I'm kind of a little bit comfortable with this list. Yeah, I'm surprised not as many teams in A tier as I thought they were gonna be. But I feel like, yeah, I feel like based on these teams' expectations and what they actually did, I feel like this is a very solid list. I feel like I'm comfortable with this list. Honestly, I am. Yeah, that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Once again, if you enjoyed the content around here, consider subscribing, like, turn on notifications, do all stuff like that. I'd really appreciate it. We upset a lot. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.